Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to our second professional development workshop. I think we've got a great panel here today to talk about what to expect in the first year or a few years of your first academic position. I know I have heard new faculty members complaining and off to the side about how difficult the start of their career is. So this is something that I think is very beneficial to all of us, at least if not right now, in the next few years. So, I'm Robin. I'm a part of the Postdoc Association. I think everyone here knows about us, but if not, we're a new organization on campus to advocate for the needs of postdocs and to provide things like professional development through things like today and social activities for postdocs, so we're not just spending all of our time in our labs or in our cubicles or wherever we happen to live most of the time. So we've got a couple, we do social events and professional development events once a month. We just had a happy hour last week and it was pretty fun. Lots of good beer over at Thirsty Fellow. We've got another one coming up. We're planning on it, and I guess
we're thinking about, nothing official yet, the first week of April doing a they do like a family day at Conquest. Sharon had mentioned this, so we're thinking about going over to Conquest, the local brewery in town, the first Sunday of April. But more details to follow on that.
Yeah, so combining both beer and family, so that sounds like a good event.
And postdocs.
And postdocs, yeah. Our next professional development event, we're also planning right now. It'll be sometime in April. And it will focus on grant writing, and specifically grant writing for early career investigators. So we probably won't focus much on things like R01s, but definitely training grants like the F32 or K awards, or some of the, like an R21. It'll be specifically geared to grants that will help or that are focused on postdocs and early career investigators. So keep your eyes peeled on the date and times for that. And with that, we can go ahead and get started. I'm going to pass around just in time. Yeah, grab a cookie and anything. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet if you could do that for us. If you want to sign up for our listserv, and if you haven't done it, I'll pass around a sheet for that as well. Okay, with that, I'll let the panelists introduce themselves, and we can get started. Okay, thanks.
I guess I'll start. Hi, I'm Daheia Barr-Anderson. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. Should we do number 1, 2 with the brief comments about it?
Yeah, why don't you just do
get started? Just really briefly. So I have actually 2 different perspectives of first year in a faculty position. This is actually my second faculty position. The first one, I was at the University of Minnesota in the School of Kinesiology for 3.5 years, and so I'll talk a bit about being at an institution or being in a department that was had a very large undergraduate population. There was a 2-and-2 teaching load. Research was important, but it wasn't important to get really large grants. It was a bonus if you were to get any NIH funding. Where the TNP, I guess tenure and promotion guidelines were less strenuous than what I'm experiencing here. So if you had 2 publications, first author, then additional co-author, that was the expectation, at least 1 book chapter, and so forth. And then being here in the Arnold School of Public Health, where I've been for 2 years, and I was part of a physical activity and health cluster hire. So I came in with peers with very similar interests and talking. So I'll talk a bit about how we kind of came together and built a very supportive network, which was very important in terms of getting yourself off the ground and not only with the research, but with just overall support, having someone who's very similar position, or someone's very similar position where you are, to discuss issues about, these rejections with manuscripts or rejections with grants. How can I build these community community ties so I can get my research up and going. So I have lots of different perspectives that I will share, including having children before tenure. Having 2 within 13 months, which is, I would not advise. If it happens, you accept that and we'll keep on going, but yes.
Okay, so I'm Edie Goldsmith, and I'm actually an associate professor at the School of Medicine. I did my PhD at UNC Chapel Hill in the chemistry department, and while I was a graduate student, I met my future spouse, and he was also a chemistry graduate student. And ended up here because he finished before I did, and his dream was to go into academics and teach at a PUI. So he got a job in the chemistry department at USC Aiken, and I came to Columbia as a postdoc, wanting to stay more in research and be at a research institution. And so I kind of followed the track that I think is common for a lot of folks now, in that I did a couple years as a postdoc in biology, moved out to the School of Medicine, did an additional years of postdoc, and then transitioned into a research assistant professor position. And at that point, that gave me the freedom to write, new investigator grants. So I'm talking about that. And I wrote for an American Heart, and when I got that funded, then my department chair put me up for a tenure track position. And so at that point in time, I moved from a research track to a tenure track position. And during that time, had the blessing of having 3 children prior to getting tenure. And so it's an experience, but it's a doable experience. And so I think, during that course of time, my husband and I had to figure out how do we balance his career with my career, and it ended up that his department was initially supportive, so we had our first child not long after I took my tenure track position. And then he took a leave of absence when our son was born to kind of stay home and be the caregiver, since I was in the process of getting my lab up and running, trying to write for that first R01, sort of building a lab. And then he went back to work for a year, and we juggled who was at home and who was at work, because we tried to stay out of daycare. And finally it ended up that when we had our second child, he left his tenured position. So he was a tenured associate professor at the time, and left that to stay home. And so then we now, come full circle, now that I'm been tenured and promoted, that he's now back teaching part-time. So he teaches here at USC in the Honors College. And so we've kind of had to deal with how do you balance 2 careers and family, and then decide whose career takes precedence at what point in time.
Very impressive. So in contrast, well, first, my name is Ryan Rykacaewski. I'm in my 2nd year as a faculty member here in the biology department in the marine science program. In contrast to these amazing women, I have had no children. I do not have a spouse. I am on my own, and I am recognizing that it's not easy, it's difficult, but I can't imagine the stuff that you guys have gone through. So I'm in the biology and marine science program here, and I have, one thing that is different about me is I feel like I've bounced between departments that are quite different. So I did my PhD at the University of California, San Diego, where I was in the oceanography department. And this was a separate campus with very little interaction with undergrads, which was nice, but that's kind of how I thought the academic world was you could do your research and nobody would come knocking on your door to bug you. After that, I did a postdoc at a government lab, so even less interaction with undergraduate students and maybe a little bit of interaction with graduate students. A government lab in New Jersey, which was great. I was there for 2 years, and then I did a year postdoc at the neighboring lab associated with Princeton University, which did have undergraduates, but we're talking like classes of 6 or 8 undergraduates, so very small, a very small population of undergraduates. And then now here at USC, where I've been for, this is my 3rd semester now, and the undergraduates here are great. They are very active, they want to get involved in research, and they come knocking on my door all the time. So just kind of balancing the time management just between research, undergraduate work, and other activities is something that that I think I am having a exciting time figuring out.
Great. I have a general outline of things that we can talk about, but if anyone has questions, it's a small enough group, we can just raise your hand and we can go handle questions that way. So I guess some of the most basic questions I have is, can you describe the negotiation process in terms of getting that first job and going back and forth with negotiating like a startup package and salary and things like that? And what are some challenges that maybe we're not thinking of? We had a great talk with Dr. Han a couple weeks ago about how to negotiate, but he talked somewhat generally, and it would be great to hear actual experiences on how what worked well and what, if you had to do it again, you would say, I would not ask for 18 computers or something.
Well, I'll start. So I was at University of Minnesota in the Department of Epidemiology and Community Health doing my postdoc, and I was in the second year of a third year postdoc when I caught wind that School of Kinesiology was looking for a tenure track position, or looking to fill a tenure track faculty position. And so I applied for it, and things went well, and they offered me the position. I read the book for women, because women usually don't ask as well as men about what we want or the salary that we deserve. Women don't ask. That was a really good book that gave me a little bit more confidence to ask what I wanted, ask for what I wanted. And but I also had the mentality, and maybe because I knew that if this didn't work out, that I had another year postdoc, that I didn't have anything to lose, that if they really didn't meet my needs, that I was willing to say no and be okay with saying no. And that when I'm back on the job market, hopefully some jobs will come available and things will work out. And so I asked what I wanted. First I did my research. Like most of the information, especially if you go to a state, like a public school, is available via the library or the state paper for South Carolina, so for USC. So I found out what the salary was for people in the department, and found out that people had completely lowballed themselves, like the salary was low. And I felt a little uncomfortable asking for so much more than what assistant professors who had been in the department were making at the time. But my mentality was, well, I can't help it. They lowball themselves. I can't do that because of the long-term implications it would have in terms of my lack of salary over my 30, 40, maybe 50-year career. I doubt it, but yeah. And so I made my list, and I talked with my postdoc mentors, and I talked with some friends who had just been on the job market and put together my list and presented it, and they were like, no, we don't have that much. We can't do the salary. And we can't do, as much startup. And so then I revised it, and I gave my justification and gave it back to her, and she was like, Daheia, we just can't do as much. And then I was like, well, this may not be the best position for me. And they were like, are you really going to say no? I mean, I remember the chair saying that, are you really going to say no? And I was like, I think I am going to say no. And then they came back with more. So, I mean, it wasn't everything that I wanted. Like, she got to the point where she gave me as much as she could, and I really felt that she gave me what she could. And then I accepted it, and it went really well. My negotiation here at South Carolina, I put together my list, and I felt very confident. And the salary here was much more, doing my research in terms of starting salaries. Or I guess salaries for people equivalent, because I had been a couple of years out. It was much more than what it was at Minnesota. And I put together a list that I felt was pretty ambitious. I should have went higher because they said yes to everything right away, which then made me say, I should have just said, threw out some crazy number for salary and see what he would have said. But it is what it is. I was happy, and I felt like I had what I needed to be successful here. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, because the worst they can say is no, and it's the chair's job to get you there for as little as possible. I mean, that's their point of view, is they want you because you've interviewed and they've made you an offer. But it's, you know, how little can I get you and get you here, but still set you up to be, you know, successful. Because then if they save that money, they've got money more put aside for the next startup package. So mine is a little different in that it's very hard to negotiate when you're already there. So being here as a research assistant faculty member, I didn't have independent lab space. I had some space, and I had some things that I had purchased. But I didn't, they sort of look at it as, oh, well, you're here. You kind of have already made things work. You can borrow things from people. You can use other folks' stuff. You know everybody. You get along. It won't be a problem. So it was harder on me to get, you know, particularly I had an easier time justifying the salary because I basically said, well, you know, you just hired these people at this, and I knew what they made, and so, you know, the new person always makes at least as much as the last person, if not a little bit more. And you find that out. You know, the longer you stay as a faculty member, you see the new assistant professor who comes in that makes more than some of the associate professors because the job market just goes up. So like she said, don't be afraid to ask, and make sure you know what that last person who was hired makes. So I did get some of what I wanted. The startup package I got is probably not what somebody who came from outside would have gotten at the time, but it was enough with the grant that I had to sort of get me going. And that's really, I think, the thing to keep in mind is whenever you come in, you know, you're going to list, okay, I may need an ultracentrifuge, and I need a tissue culture hood, and I need, you know, this kind of microscope and whatever. And, you know, the chair is going to look around and they're going to say, okay, well, we sort of have one of these over here in this room, so you can share this. And but if it's something that you really need that you will use all the time, don't compromise on that item, because, you know, faculty play nice to a point, and then people get possessive and maybe they don't play so nice anymore. So if it's something that's key for your research, you need to hold out for those particular items and make sure you get them.
Yeah. I had a somewhat of a surprising experience when I was going through this process. At least it was surprising to me, and maybe it's not if you guys are in touch with other people that are interviewing and working with. But two of the places I interviewed, they asked for a startup package before the offer. And I don't know how common that is. But they asked you, you know, I went and I interviewed two different places, including USC, and they asked you to propose a startup package before they make you an offer. So that puts you in a really tricky position, because you don't want to propose something outrageously high, because then they're going to laugh and say, maybe we don't really want this person. But you don't want to lowball yourself, because then you can't get the work done that you want to get done. So, you know, I proposed something that I thought was completely reasonable, and one school said no, that's way too much, and one school said yes, like we can totally do that. So it was tricky though, because I definitely couldn't propose, I didn't want to propose too much. So it forces you to be honest, I think, and figure out what you really need to get done, what you want to get done. So that was good, but I think you guys are right. Don't be afraid to ask, because USC came right back and they said, yeah, we can do that, no problem. And when they said that, I thought maybe I should have. But yeah, that was tricky.
And it's going to be your only chance to buy some of this stuff too, because I mean, when you get a grant, you know, you want to spend your grant money on research supplies and people. You don't want to have to go out and spend it on a $40,000 PCR machine because you didn't get one as part of your startup. And so that's sometimes mistakes that people, I've seen other folks who've been hired after me have made, that they negotiate their startup, and like you said, you don't want to ask too much because you're afraid, oh, they won't take me if I ask for too much. And then they realize, okay, now I've got to go use, you know, startup money that maybe I was going to hire a technician with to buy this, because, you know, it's not here and I didn't think about that, or, you know, what somebody else said I could use is really not going to meet my needs.
And you have to remember that this is your one chance at a startup, like ever, unless you decide that you're worth more in terms of salary and that you need more resources, and so put yourself out there and go back on the job market and get another offer, and then, hopefully your department will try to retain you. And I've seen people get a huge boost in their salary because you don't get much of a boost when it comes to TMP when you get tenured and promoted. And so I've also seen people when they've gone out and gotten another offer to also get a pot of money, something very similar to a startup package that they could use for research. So.
With your startup package, it's pretty easy to find salaries of new hires and things like that, but it's much more difficult to find out what other people got for startup packages. So how did you guys go about setting that amount? Did you just go through what you think you needed and add up a total?
I did a combination of that. So things that I thought that I needed, but then I always feel like there's something that I'm going to forget.
Mm-hmm.
And so I talked a lot with my friends that were at other institutions who are at different stages, even those who had been in a faculty position for 5+ years, just to make sure I could get as comprehensive of a list as possible, and that I've thought about all the different types of ways I could use the money and things I could buy. And it's a little different for me because I don't have a lab per se. I don't have like the regular, very expensive equipment. And I made sure that I spoke with people who did the type of research, like community-based behavioral research, because I had a friend who's in the biological sciences, got almost $500,000 in startup, and if I was to say, can I have $500,000? Ha ha ha! I'm taking away your offer. That's ludicrous. So I just tried to get as much information as possible that way.
Yeah, so I had the advantage of being the internal person. I knew what the startup packages were for the two folks who'd come in before me. So, I got to see sort of okay, this is what they're getting, but then it's going back to the chair and justifying, okay, well, this is why you should give me, something close to what you gave them, even though I've been here for a while.
How did you find out what they're starting?
They told me.
Okay.
So it turns out, and once you get, my department is very collegial. There were a group of us that were hired within a year and a half of each other. There were 4 assistant professors who came in. And so we all went to lunch and we talked, and they were very candid with me about, this is what I got.
Was there a difference between your startup package being a research assistant professor as opposed to those that were tenure track?
Because I was here, yes, I can tell you, I did not get what the folks who came in externally got. And my department chair's logic in that, I got significantly less, but his logic was, I had a grant, I had bought some things, I had a lab that was, like I said, it wasn't independent space per se. I had a bench and something in my postdoc mentor's lab. But I had enough that he was going to try to call me independent already. And he said, you're kind of functioning, we're going to give you some. But there was, that was but the trade-off was I was here, my spouse had a job, because I interviewed other places, and then we would have had the classic two-body problem again of, not only do you need a position for me, but you need something for him, and you need 2 startups. And so while not, I have interviewed since and been offered very competitive packages, but balancing the choice between having to look for 2 jobs versus 1, I took what was offered and just recognized that because of my being here already, that was sort of an advantage for my chair and not something that was advantageous for me personally.
And the fact that I was bouncing around these different departments, I thought made it a little bit tricky for me, because I would talk to people that I worked with as a postdoc, and I knew what competitive startup packages were. But those are very different than startup packages in the biology department where I am now. So I think that kind of threw me off a little bit, but I don't know what you can do about that. So the way I went about it was I just made a list of everything I thought I needed, and that's what I pitched. But now, since I've been here and I've been on the other side and been on a few faculty search committees, I'm like, holy cow, I could have thrown in an extra $250,000 or something like that. When they want you, and I watched a little bit of the video from 2 weeks ago, and the professor was right. When they want you, you are in charge. I guess it's tricky if they ask for a startup package before they make you an offer, because it's hard to say, well, can I get a little bit more out of that after they make you the offer? But you are in charge once they make you an offer and before you've accepted.
Can we start talking a little bit about what actually happens in your first year? I know you mentioned you didn't anticipate this flood of undergrads coming. So are you, in that first year, are you overwhelmed teaching classes? Is your research just spent mostly getting your lab set up and you're not actually doing anything, or it feels like you're not doing anything? Are you spending a lot of time interacting with students? Can you just talk about your first year?
Yeah, I think one of the things to negotiate for when you start out is maybe think about, it was common in my department to get a 1 semester teaching release. And sometimes they advise that you use that right away, and sometimes they advise that you squirrel it away for some semester when you really need it. They advised me to go ahead and use it right away, and they said if something comes up and you need another teaching semester release, it's possible if you have a really good reason before tenure that you can maybe get another semester off. So that is something that I have in the back of my mind. So I did use my 1 semester teaching release when I first started, and that gave me time to kind of get the lab set up, buy a bunch of computers and servers and stuff that I needed to do my work. And even before I started teaching, though, the undergrads were knocking on the door looking for work to do, which is really good. It's hard to look at like a smiling, bright face and say like, no, my lab is full. I don't have time. I have other stuff I need to do. But I think you do have to say no sometimes, and I've started to be better about that. I just turned down a review last week. I feel pretty good about that. Just small stuff like that, like learn to say no a little bit and manage your time. Teaching is important. It takes a lot of time, but I think you can compartmentalize it. So I told myself when I have been teaching that I'm not going to start working on my lecture or touching things up until like the afternoon before. So that at least gives me time, at least in the morning and early afternoon, to focus on other things, which I think I need to do, because you really can keep touching up your lectures till they're perfect, but they're never going to be perfect, but you could always do more. And when you have like a captive audience, you really want them to like what you're saying and to think you're a good teacher. But half of them are going to be asleep anyway, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean it does matter, but it doesn't matter as much as you think it does when you're trying to put time into preparing that lecture. So limit the time you put into lectures. Yeah.
Yeah, so the one thing I did get is I got a year out of teaching. For the reason, so that you have time to set your lab up, get your experiments going, and get a technician or a student in the lab. So I did that. And the other thing I did was I negotiated what I would and wouldn't teach. So I'm a chemist by training. I'm in the cell biology and anatomy department, and one of the things that we do teach is anatomy for medical students. I know anatomy. And it's a very time-consuming class in that the professors not only do the lectures, but they do the labs. So it is easily, 10 plus hours per week, 12 hours of commitment for that. And so I stipulated that my department chair, I actually made him put it in my offer letter, that I would not be required to teach gross anatomy. Because if you have it in your letter, that's the one binding agreement you have between your department chair and you. And so that was one thing that I knew. I just didn't want to put, like he said, you can spend lots of time, and the less familiar you are with the subject, the more time you're going to spend doing it, because you do want everybody to be happy with you. And so I was very careful to stipulate what I would and wouldn't teach, so that at least I could minimize the amount of preparation and time it was going to take. There are things that my department teaches that I'm more comfortable with. And so I opted to get into those courses to meet my teaching requirements for P&T, as opposed to get into something that I knew would take most of my week to do.
So for me, I negotiated, so I had a 2-2 teaching load, and I negotiated full release the first semester, and then to teach one class my second semester. And then I also negotiate. I had asked for 1 year of no university or departmental service, but it was a norm in that department to give 2 years release, which was really nice. And so I got the 2 years of no service from the department in college. So I didn't teach that first semester. I wrote 2 grants. That second semester I was supposed to teach, but it was low enrollment for a new graduate course. I did not publicize it very well, which is a good thing now. Because then I ended up having a year off from teaching, and I received and got 3 grants right away. And so then I was able to buy out of teaching for the next year. So instead of having the 4 classes, I only taught 1 my second year while I got to do my research. And then there was another grant that I had received. So my third year, I only taught 1 class. So I guess the 3 years I should have taught 12 classes, and I taught 2. Which was really nice to be able to really focus on my research. I do enjoy working with students, but I have very little teaching experience. I was a research assistant only in grad school, and then during my postdoc, I was a TA and tried to get some teaching experience, and I've done several guest lectures, but that is not my strong suit. So when I can get out of teaching, I do get out of teaching, although I'm feeling more comfortable now. And so that was my goal initially, because I knew I would spend entirely too much time trying to prepare, that I wouldn't have a good filter to say stop. And when I did teach those 2 times, I did not have a good filter to say stop, and spent entirely too much time given what it's really worth. You get that personal gratification. But when it comes to the TMP, it's not up there with the research. So that was, and the service was good, which was really important for me because I'm a double minority, being a woman and African American, and so when it comes to committees, and I'm seeing that now since I don't have that restriction, they always want diversity in terms of for the committees, and so I'm asked quite a bit to be on committees, some that are very relevant and I'm very interested in, and some not so much. And so I have to decide which commitments will allow me to get something more out of it than just serving on whatever that task is of completing, that could really propel my either research or propel me somehow with my career. So yeah, it's kind of how.
And with teaching, are these courses that were established courses, or did you have to design your own course from scratch?
Yeah, for me, I teach, I've been here 3 semesters. I've been here, this is my 4th semester, I guess, so I've taught 3 classes. And the courses, 2 of the courses have been taught before, which was great, and the professors, the previous professors were very willing to share their notes with me. They happened to be Tuesday, Thursday classes when they were taught before, and I was teaching them Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so that always takes some effort to rearrange things, but at least you have most of the material that you need. So that was good. And then the class I'm teaching this semester is a much smaller class. It has 13 or 14 students in it, and it is something in my specialty, and this is the arrangement we made with my chair when I was hired, that I would teach 2 big classes and then 1 class that I could kind of direct things more in the direction I wanted to go. And this semester the class is great because we talk about whatever I want to talk about. It's much more focused in my area of research, so we have a great time. The material, so the first semester I taught here, I had a class of like 206 students. It was a big class, and you just have to try to make it fun, and it feels really good when you give a good lecture and you walk out and you're like, yeah, that was a good lecture. I don't mind doing this so much, but the days that are rough, when you have 205 people sleeping, that is hard. But do what you can do to make it fun. Pull out all the stops on gimmicks. Like today, if they answered a question right, I threw out Mardi Gras beads. It's Mardi Gras stuff like that. And they think you're a huge dork, but it doesn't matter because we are huge dorks. But as long as they're laughing and having fun and learning stuff, then you feel like you're doing a good job.
there's a couple things that I want to get to before we run out of time, so I'll go to them right now, and then we can jump back if we want to. Well, the first one is tenure promotion, and the second is the family life balance. So I know there's dual career families and new children and things like that. So whatever you guys want to talk about first. How about tenure and promotion? Like, are you constantly, Dr. Heaney kind of mentioned that essentially everything you do until you get tenure, you're thinking about how it affects whether you'll get tenure or not. Is that right?
Yeah. And so the nice thing, so at Minnesota, it was very, very clear what I needed to do to get tenure. Here it is not. It's very gray. And so then there's always the apprehension of like, am I doing enough? But I feel like I'm at a different stage of my career, or my stage of my life, because of the fact that when I started at Minnesota, I was married, but my husband always traveled a lot, so it was really like I was single and really got to focus a lot on my career without having to think about anyone or anything else. But now I have 2 small children, they're 2.5-year-old and 3.5-year-old. My husband still travels a lot, so I'm like a single parent a whole lot. And so I have had to come to a place where when I'm at work, of being as focused as I can be, and get what I can get done and not beating myself up about it. I don't work on weekends because I need to spend time with my children. It's bad enough that I drop them off at daycare between 7 and 7:30, and sometimes don't pick them up until 6 o'clock. And so they're going straight to bed after they eat. I know, I forgot to and so being okay with that, like this is what my life is. So I just read the book Lean In. So this is a great book to read for women. That's my leaning in. That's how I'm leaning in, but so much, and doing what fits my lifestyle and being okay with it, and hiring a housekeeper. Having someone to do the things that I want to get done, but I don't really have the time to do, and it really, I don't get an extra badge if I clean my house, but I want to clean the house. So things like that to kind of think about.
And so I think when I looked at it, I kept in mind what I needed for tenure and promotion. Research, teaching, and service, sort of in that order. And then she's right, the guidelines here at USC, you must have substantial, outstanding research. Okay, what's outstanding? Sort of in my unit in School of Medicine, the rule of thumb was you had to have an R1 to get tenure. And so it's not written down anywhere, but we all knew that those voting on your tenure package expected to see an R1. And so, that was my focus. I spent the first several years, I did some teaching, but I focused on my research. And, I got my R1. And then I picked up more teaching, and I made sure, like our criteria say you have to have a minimum teaching eval of 3.5. Okay, so look at, how am I doing with my students? Am I telling enough jokes? Are my lectures lively enough? Do I need to I do food analogies for principles that I teach, so, I bring in grapes and talk about glands, and I hand out the grapes, and goofy things, but it keeps them engaged, because I knew that there's a mark I had to hit. Because if I was 3.3, well, she doesn't meet the teaching criteria. Somebody could have used that. And then I picked up service, and I was very conscious of the service I picked up, in that, the criteria said you had to do departmental, university, and unit, or college, excuse me. And so I found committees that were low workload committees. So everybody, all the faculty know, okay, you get on the library committee, they meet twice a year, or you do this committee. And so you could check the box and meet the criteria, but it's not a heavy workload. Don't sign up for the admissions committee, because at the School of Medicine, they meet weekly, it's a lot of work. And as an assistant professor, my focus needed to be get the grant. And once I had the grant, then I could worry about the other pieces. But I was very in tune with what I had to have, based on the rumors to make the tenure and promotion. And, that gets a little dicey when you do throw kids into the mix. You know, I was out on maternity leave with my first one. I came back and my department chair says, you're going to submit your R1 in 2 months, right? Okay, yes, R1's going in. It came back not funded. Pregnant with my second child. You're going to resubmit your R1, right? It's like, okay, deadline is July 1. My baby's due July 4th. And I told my child, I said, you just hang on to the 30th so I can hit the FedEx drop. He was born July 1st. But I made it to the FedEx drop, and I got my R1. But that was kind of, you know, just the way life worked. Keeping in track, the family is here, but where are the milestones?
Did you find that you were very, very productive when you were pregnant? I got some of my best work.
I did, because I knew that once I had my child, I was going to be unproductive. I didn't know how long the non-productive period would last, but for those of you out there who think you're going to go on maternity leave and you're going to write a grant and you're going to write all these papers, no. Because, you know, if you're the female, you're not sleeping. If you're the male, your wife is waking you up and you're not sleeping. So it's not like a 6-week vacation if you take 6 weeks or however long leave you take. It's, you know, I have a hard time remembering what happened in those 6 weeks.
I actually got a lot. My baby slept a lot, so I actually got a lot done for the first pregnancy. The second one, nothing. No. But yeah, it just so happened. Yeah, so I would have her right here in my chest, you know. Yeah. So, yeah.
I can't speak to how productive I was when I was pregnant, but I can say that that yes, I've heard other professors say, you know, put a Post-it on your computer monitor that says, will this get you tenure? And before you agree to do something over email, look at that Post-it and be like, am I straying too far? Am I trying to do too much? Or am I doing stuff that is great to do, but it's not going to get me tenure at the cost of doing something that should get me tenure? And I'm still, you know, wading through that water. Like, I have to sort through it every day, and I probably am straying too far, but I'm sure it'll work out. But it's always on my mind, yeah.
And you know, one thing that I thought, because I would say about a year and a half ago after moving here, and things were tougher here than in terms of TMP than at Minnesota, I started getting really stressed out. Like, just really, that it was all about tenure and just getting very stressed out and not enjoying the work that I'm doing. And then I read this blog that was by a professor at Harvard, and she was talking about how that's where she was in her career, where she just wasn't happy, she was all stressed out. And then someone said, you need to have fun, like you need to have joy in what you're doing, or the research that you're doing, that it brings you some type of fulfillment. And so she kind of stepped back and she, you know, started talking about that. It made me kind of step back and start thinking about how could I bring that joy back to my work? Because we spend too much time and energy to do something that makes us miserable, even though, you know, that endpoint is tenure. So like, what if you don't get tenure? Like, is it really the end of the world? And so keeping it in the back of my mind, that's what I'm working towards, but not having that as the only focus of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because there's some work that I do, and a lot of it is around service, and because I do community-based work, service with some community organizations, that may not put me as far along in, you know, in terms of tenure guidelines, but it brings me a lot of joy and happiness and peace with that, and it really doesn't take that much extra time to do. But knowing that I can't fill my day with, you know, activities like that, but just trying to find a balance is where I am now with my career. I don't know how.
I have a question, actually. Where I did my graduate work, you could delay your tenure clock a year if you were a mother or a father, if you had kids. Was that an option for you guys? And if it was, did you consider it, or did you not?
So at the time when I had my children at USC, it was voluntary. You had to request for the delay. And I opted not to do it. With all three of mine, I opted not to, because my concern, whether it was valid or not, was how does that year count? Because what tends to happen is people, you know, we're numbers people by and large, okay? You've been here for 5 years. How many papers do you have over 5 years? Okay? If you've been here for 7 years, oh, well, you've been here longer. You should have more papers. And so that's kind of what weighed in my mind is, and my department chair really couldn't tell me, or at least couldn't explain to where I felt comfortable, how faculty view that extension. Do they view it as you've had additional time, you should have more work done, or do they view it as that's a year where you really, you were regrouping, you may have gotten some things done, but you didn't get as much as you might could have in other years per se. And so that was my reason for not opting to do it. The policy has since changed to now for if you claim family medical leave for that, you are automatically granted a 1-year extension. Now you can come up what would be considered coming up early, and there's no penalty for doing that. But they automatically kind of put that in place to take away, I think, some of the fear that folks like myself may have had, that if I request this, it somehow singles me out or separates me from my peers.
So when I had my children, I was at Minnesota, and so it was the norm. So what is now the guidelines at USC, that they automatically stopped your clock, and if you wanted to go early, you could go early. And so it wasn't even, it wasn't even anything I had to think twice about. That's what people did, and it was acceptable to do. Because I know at some places, if you stop your clock, it's kind of frowned upon. They can't say it, but they do, and the person, usually a female, is penalized in a way for stopping her clock.
Now, one other thing I can add too that my husband and I ran into, since we're both in the USC system, is we couldn't both take leave. One of us or the other had to take leave, but we couldn't both take it. And that kind of struck us. We were surprised since we were at separate campuses. But so I ended up being the one who took leave, and he went back to work. Our first son was born over Christmas. He went back to work January 5th, 6th, whenever the semester started. And that policy still hasn't changed to my knowledge. It's still one or the other can take leave.
What about, kind of as we wrap up, is there one thing that you did right and one thing you did wrong in your first couple years that you could bestow on us?
So many things wrong. One thing that I did do right is that early on I caught wind of this. So there's this lady named Carrie Ann Rockymore who has it's a nonprofit organization. I can never remember, but it's called the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. She used to be an assistant professor, went through all of this, rigmarole of first faculty position, trying to get tenure, and she, at her institution, was missing out on mentoring on how to navigate this whole scene. And so once she received tenure, she decided to leave academia, and then her focus was about mentoring young faculty members. And she also targets grad students and postdocs. And she started this organization. And with it, I did like a semester-long kind of boot camp in terms of really being able to focus on my goals. So you always have like these general goals, and you may even write down your goals for the semester. But I wasn't always consistent in terms of having my semester goals and then my long-term goals, and making a plan to reach those goals. And so that was her whole emphasis, of doing that, of like those weekly planning meetings, of setting your goals and working towards them, instituting that regular writing. Like, if you wrote 30 minutes a day, you'll write so much more than if you tried to cram it all in, like once a week for a couple of hours, and you're much more productive of really kind of laying down those habits and establishing those habits. So, and I would urge you to go to our website and kind of check it out. It's www.facultydiversity.org. She just has great information, and just great information on all of these topics that are very relevant to as you move to your faculty position. What I did wrong, I don't know. It's just I don't think I did too many. I don't think I did anything horribly wrong that was just detrimental. But I'm sure there were missteps that I blocked it out. Then I got pregnant, so I really didn't like myself.
I had a hard time saying no. when I first started. I was, eager to fit in, to be a part of the department. Faculty was exciting. And I had a hard time saying no. My department chair had to hammer me. Just say no, it's okay. You don't have to do everything. So that was, I think, probably if I had to say I did something wrong, that would be it. It really helped me get the lab going, get it organized. She probably had better organizational skills than I did. And I think that really kind of set me off. Getting a good key person in there to kind of help you get started, I think really set me off on a smooth transition to having my own space and my own research program.
Yeah. I think I would reiterate, learn to say no. I have 2 chairs because I have a joint appointment, and I know they're looking out for my best interests, and they told me to say no when you want to say no, and they say no all the time. You don't need to do any more than I ask you to do, or you need to do the absolute minimum in terms of service your first few years here, which is all great. But then when they come and they ask you to do stuff, you kind of have to say yes, and sometimes it's a lot. And I end up saying yes too much, and I still do. So I need to say no more. A few things small things that I wish I had thought about a little bit more were, my office doesn't have a window, my lab doesn't have a window. A window doesn't matter, you're still gonna be productive, but when you're sitting inside, all day, all the time, holy cow, it'd be nice to have a window. Yeah. Stuff like that. I think I could have thought about that a little bit more. What I did right, I think, even though I whine about having a lot of undergrads in the lab, they do make it lively. I'm glad that I at least have some people in the lab at all times. And the undergrad that I took on first semester I was here, he is doing an excellent job, and he goes to conferences now and presents work. And that takes a load off my shoulders, and he's doing great. It's an undergrad going off to scientific conferences. So he's learning a lot, and I have 3 or 4 more in the lab, and each one of them are doing, each one is doing a good job. So I think I did okay with the undergrads. I just, when they come to me and ask me a question, I really just want to say, you can go figure it out. Where I usually sit down in front of the computer and suddenly my morning's gone. So I need to push more on them. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Ryan, that I think would be useful for the postdocs here. How did you make that decision to accept a joint position? Because as a postdoc, I was always told, you avoid a joint position like the plague, because you're then kind of serving two
bosses.
Without doing over 100% plus work.
The program that attracted me here only has joint appoints, so it's a program and not a department. And so if I wanted to be part of that program, I was going to have a joint appointment. And it's an excellent program, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. I don't think if I had come here just for the department, just for the biology department, and not also for the marine science program, I probably would have really considered other offers, because it wasn't really the biology department alone that drew me here. It was the marine science program and the biology department. So I didn't really have a choice in that case. But it is difficult because you do have 2 bosses, you do have 2 committees, and people don't always remember that you have that other role, and you have twice as many people coming to ask you to do stuff as they do.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
I have a question kind of back to some of the negotiating, like startup and salary. I've talked to friends who recently got hired. They had a couple different. One got offered something, he came back and countered with higher, and they met in the middle. One had to come up with something, and he also got a counter offer. I didn't hear you guys say anything about counter offers. So if you asked for something and someone said no, did they counter, or did they say no, come up with something else?
Usually they come back with something else because they want you at that point in time. They're talking to you to get you there. And it's just a sense of, like she said, if you come in and, you ask for, you ask for $1 million in startup. Well, okay, we can't do that. Maybe we'll go, the chair probably knows, okay, I could go to maybe 750. I'm going to offer them 6. and see will they take 6, and then you could go back and say, well, I really can't do it for less than this. So there is some room to go back and forth. That's what I found in subsequent negotiations, other than my first one. That's what I found.
We did go back and forth with the first one, and we found that middle ground.
In my case, at USC, there was no need to go back and forth. They said okay. At the other places, they just said we're not going to be able to do that. Like cut that in a third, and then we'll talk. So that was almost like a no, you're ridiculous. But I kind of knew what USC was offering, and it was hard. It was hard to cut it by a third.
Now, did that have to do with the size of the institutions you were applying to? Were you applying to schools that were all the same size as USC, or?
They were probably not as big as USC, but public institutions. I think their departments were just in different financial condition, or different types of departments. So different departments around campus will have wildly different starter packages. And I was applying to like different departments, so they weren't really comparable. But in my mind, that was what I was comparing. So I knew what they were up against, and I kind of knew who was probably going to win.
You had a great point about negotiating salary. Where you looked at University of Minnesota and you said everyone else all these new assistant professors, they totally lowballed it, and I'm not going to do that. How is that? How do you balance that with not upsetting those assistant professors who say, all of a sudden, hey, whoa, I've been here 2 years and she just came in and she's getting $10,000 more than me?
Yeah, so I just gave, I felt like that's up to the chair to do. Like, that was not my job to make that decision. And so I gave them the number that I felt I was worth. I didn't get that number because the chair was really about the equity within the department within reason. I did get more than what they were getting, or what they received initially, and with kind of like that bump you would expect each year. And so, I don't feel like that's mine, I can ask, I have to, ask for what I feel like I'm worth.
Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, about what they will think.
And remember that they're going to look at that and they're going to say, holy cow, the new guy is getting $10,000 more than I am. But you only have to wait another year, and then everybody's you're going to be on the other team, and then we're all going to say, look at the new guy. He's getting so much more than we all got. So you get old fast.
I got a question. So for the two-body problem, dual hiring, what kind of expectations should the other spouse have in terms of like what the spouse that has a job or has an offer, what they can demand in terms of those negotiations? I know different universities maybe have different policies. I don't think that they can really guarantee that the other spouse, they can find them a job, but I guess just wondering what expectations should one have in that process?
So it depends on how bad they want the spouse. Okay. So like, for example, when my husband took his initial faculty position, his department chair told him in no uncertain terms they would not consider me because they would not hire two spouses into the same department. And it was a small enough institution that they didn't, it's just the way it was. And so we knew coming in, when he took that position, I'd have to find something somewhere else. Like I have. So I have interviewed, since getting my position here, and I think it really varies depending upon how bad they want it, the first person. USC, in my opinion, I guess is not as strong as some institutions. They will tell you the line is that they won't guarantee, but they will do what they can. I think, again, depending on how much they want the first spouse, they will find a position for the second spouse. Sometimes it's not tenure track, sometimes it's a non-tenure position. But other institutions will say, we'll bring you both on. You'll get this, he'll get this, you'll get this, she'll get this. So it's going to vary from institution to institution. But I think part of what you have to decide in the two-body problem is, it's hard because, you know, there's the, and I guess it's how you look at it, there's the wanted spouse and then the trailing spouse, or the, you know, oh, by the way, my, you know, husband is looking for, because it's hard to know when to bring that up. When you interview, they can't ask you what your spouse does.
So is it better to bring that up during the interview process, or wait until you have an offer?
You wait till you have an offer.
Okay.
Because at the point that you're interviewing, they can decide, if you tell them, they can decide, okay, do we really want to deal with the two-body problem? After they make you, at least my advice would be, wait till they make you an offer. Because then, you know, so the most recent job that I looked at, I went back for the second interview, and I had my offer at that point, took my spouse back for the visit. I was like, you know, this is what my spouse does. And that's when we started talking about, okay, you know, what are his interests? Who can we get him hooked up with on campus to see what kind of a position they would have? It drags out the negotiation a little bit because you have to get other deans and chairs involved. But I would wait till the end and let them make you the offer, because then at that point in time, clearly they want you. You know, up to that point, you're one of 3 to 5 people they're considering. And so if it's, you know, less of a headache, then okay, well maybe we'll look at a couple of the other folks first.
I think it varies a lot between institutions and even within departments, or between departments. Some places, like you know, on USC, some departments I've noticed are very accepting and want you to bring it up as soon as possible, because they'd really like to accommodate that, because they feel like that's a place where they have leverage over other universities or other departments at other institutions. And some places just don't want to deal with it. I've noticed it both ways. I know that in the marine science program, they've been very accommodating, and so when you come for your visit, they won't ask you, but they'll say, just to let you know, we really support, you know, family life here, and they, you know, they're not asking you, but they're trying to say, we really like you, and we would like to do everything we can to convince you to accept the offer, or, you know, really consider this. So it's going to vary a lot between places.
Yeah, within the Arnold School, I think they do what they can for spousal hires. I mean, within our department, the last couple of hires, their spouses also receive positions. And I can name a couple more people across the Arnold School, and we in fact are getting someone in Edie because the spouse is going to HPV, and so it's a research assistant professor position. But yeah, if they want you, they'll make way. But even if you don't, like, even if my husband's not in academia, but I made that offer was made clear to me during the interview process. I don't feel like it was afterwards that did we need any assistance, you know, with my husband finding a job.
Any other questions?
Maybe. I don't know if this is the right question. I'm still sort of thinking about it. In terms of getting research done, getting publications out, but then mentoring undergrads versus masters versus PhD versus postdocs, do any of them sort of count more or less, or help you more or less before tenure and promotion? Does that factor into your decision?
That's a really good question. Do I know the answer?
I know of some departments that one of the requirements is you must graduate a PhD student before you come up for tenure. You know, I know other places where they want to see that you've trained students, but it's not necessary that you've had any particular combination of them. Because I think training students is evidence of developing a research program. And so certainly if you can get some graduated, it's nice. Like, for example, I didn't graduate my first PhD student until after I was tenured. But I had graduated several master's students, and I had some undergrads, and had a postdoc, actually 2 postdocs. So there's no, you know, you can look and see, and you can get sort of a general sense from the department if it's a requirement or not. But most of the times it's just, you have to have mentored students in some capacity.
Yeah, I think it's going to be department dependent again. Where I went to grad school, you had to have finished a PhD student if you were going to get tenure. Here, I think the wording is like you must contribute significantly to graduate education, which doesn't really, that means maybe you taught a class or something like that, but it's very variable. So graduate students are great because, or PhD students are great because you have a lot of time for them to develop their project, I feel like, and they can mature and you can put your stamp on them a little bit more than, say, a master's student who comes in and they're good because you don't have to give a lot of upfront commitment because maybe it's only 2 years or something, but they need to hit the ground running if they're going to get out of here in 2 years. A PhD student you can let flounder for a little while and mature. And then a postdoc is here to write papers and to do great work and get on their way. At least I haven't had a postdoc yet, but I hope that's kind of how it works. So there's pluses and minuses to all of them. But it really would depend on what your tenure guidelines say, what you're going to do.
Did any of you use your own startup for like funding a PhD student or so? Or did any get any fund for a PhD student?
Yeah, part of that's what you negotiate too.
Yeah.
Funding for students for at least, for some period of time, hopefully 3 years, 1 or 2 slots. At Minnesota, it was very clear that they would fund. I think I received, I can't even remember, but they funded students, and that was part of my negotiating in terms of the number of students. Here at USC, I got a pot of money that I can use any way that I want to. And so to help fund students is what I've used part of it for.
I mean, the other thing to think about is, and this is something that we don't have at the medical school, which like traditional science departments have, is we don't have TA-ships. Whereas like in biology and chemistry here, they do. So while it's not ideal to have your students TA because that's time out of the lab, that also helps you stretch your dollars a little further. So if you've got a student who has an interest, like I've had students who wanted to TA at some point in time because they feel like it's a teaching experience that then they can use to get a faculty position. And so, you let them TA, but that, again, kind of helps you get your money to go a little further.
Yeah. Yeah, so when I made a list of what I wanted for my startup package, I had students on there. And you do that, you use that to negotiate for the startup. But then you're right, when they need TAs in biology, they're not going to come back to you and say, you don't get a TA because you had on your startup package. Because they give you a pot of money and you can use that for what you want to use it for. So yeah, you can use it to your advantage, but you can request graduate student positions in your startup.
Another question. You said that for tenure track and promotion in medical school, you are expected to get RO1. What about honors school, public health, and biology? How much are you expected to get?
It's very gray. Like, it's
because
gray.
I've heard some people saying you
Okay.
can even get tenure track promotion without even bringing money in some cases.
My guidelines don't say R01, they say substantial research.
Yeah. But the
That
common
means that
practice
the
is.
the understood thing there is an R01. And what we face now is, so I get to sit on the other side. Being tenured, I get to vote on the files. And, the discussion, I think this is relevant to y'all, so I'll share it. The discussion we're having is, given the current funding climate, is it fair to hold junior faculty to the you must have an R1? Because there are, NIH funding is 10% or less in most institutes. That doesn't mean you're doing bad science, it just means there's a smaller pot of money. And so, we're having the discussions now as to, really what is it going to constitute to have a successful research program. If you can get, an R21 or some foundation money and you're publishing, is that sufficient for tenure at this point in time? Does that meet the substantial, as opposed to saying you must have an R01? And I think that's important for you guys because depending on when you're moving, funding is not looking good anytime soon.
we've been told kind of unofficially that, because they recognize the funding climate and how difficult it is to get grants, but you need to have that history of steadily putting in grants and trying to get funded, because you can't get a grant if you don't try. And so whether or not we need an R, I know for a fact we don't need an R1 because of past applicants who went up for tenure that they didn't have R01. And I think someone hasn't even had like a small R grant, but that steady history of trying to obtain that funding is really important.
Yeah, I think when you're a tenure track assistant professor, that's the only time you're going to get credit for submitting a failing proposal. So you have to give it a shot. And I don't think we have a rule. The biology department is so big that it covers so many different disciplines that we don't have a strict rule about you must have an R01. But you must have enough support to keep your research going. It says it's something like that in the guidelines. So you're expected to bring in money, and as an assistant professor, you are expected to submit, pretty much to every call that comes up.
Can you share how much you got in the first couple of years, or how many proposals you applied for, and how many proposals you got funded?
I think I came in with one proposal funded that just finished up late last year, and I think I've submitted, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 since then, and I think I might have 3 or 4 in review right now, but none of them have been funded yet.
For my first position, I, counting PI and co-investigator, I would say those first couple of years, at least 7 or 8. And of those, they were all funded except for 1. And it was 5 that were first, like where I was the PI. And here, I have applied for 5 grants as PI. I haven't gotten any. As co-investigator, I've been on, I think, 6 grants, and of those 6, 2 have been funded, and 2 are still under review. So I haven't had any success personally since being here in this position.
And I think I put in, probably in my first 3 years, for like foundation or federal grants, it was 5 or 6, and I hit on 2 of them. So it's tough.
I know we're running out of time. So my question is about if you were sure you wanted to go into academia, and if you were not, like, what made you go down how to do it here?
I was sure I wanted to go in academia, and it had to do with my master's experience, which I did here in the Department of Epidemiology. My graduate assistantship was with the Office of Public Health Practice, and when I started, I guess he's president past leaves now, but he had just become the dean of the School of Public Health, and he had this initiative to increase the diversity of faculty. I think at the time there were 71, 72 full-time faculty members in the School of Public Health, and only 3 were minority. And so it just made me, as a graduate student working on this initiative, made me kind of reflect on my experiences, and it just kind of really planted the seed that I wanted to be one of the few, faculty members of color. And so I knew I wanted to go in academia. I've never thought about industry. I mean, now I think about it at times. Going out to start a yoga studio and just doing life that way. But yeah, that's what I want. Yeah.
I went to graduate school as a chemist thinking I would go into industry, and I remember watching my PhD advisor renew her grants, thinking there was no way on earth I was ever going to do that. And so I saw postdocs. It's okay, I'll just do that for a couple years and then get in and go into industry. And I guess the longer I stayed in academics, it just felt sort of right and felt comfortable. And so now I am my PhD advisor. Renewing my grants and pulling my hair out and going, yeah, industry looks, I think about my friends who are, I got LinkedIn connection from one the other day who said vice president of something or another in some startup company, and I'm like, huh, well, that's looking a lot better.
Yeah, for me, I think in the field I'm in, I could either go into like government work, or a soft money position, or an academic position. And as a postdoc, kind of drifting around amongst those things, I think I realized that like the government work and the soft money positions are great. Into a government position, for example, it's pretty difficult to come back to an academic position. Just because you're in a government position, you might be on a 12-month salary. You have a pretty cushy job. I think it's easier to go from academics to government than from government to academics. So I thought, since I'm being productive and I'm excited about what I do, I might as well stick with academics for as long as I can. So give it a shot.
Any other questions?
How many publications are expected roughly per, well, not exact numbers, but roughly per year during the 5 years? And 2 previous publications before getting here came toward tenure and promotion.
So I can speak on that. Like when I came here, even though I had a fair amount of funding and my publications were at a good place, that my tenure clock started over. I have the option of going up early if I like, but I feel like I need to hit a big grant in order to do so. And so it depends on your institution, because I know some people have been able to negotiate, like if you switch institutions, for a couple of years from the previous institution to count, is for some of that work to count. But they want to make sure that you're able to reestablish yourself and to be successful in this new environment.
Yeah, so in my unit, it depends. The rule of, it's kind of the, not rule of thumb, but the sort of general thing is minimum of 2 publications per year if you come in as an assistant professor. Now, what happens is if you're an individual, so like you, for example, if you've been at another institution but not tenured and you moved, our guidelines say that if you come in as an assistant professor, you start over, and it only counts from what you do here at USC. However, if you come in as an associate professor without tenure, you get to count everything that you did previously. So that's where it pays to look at the TNP guidelines of the institutions you're going to, or you're considering, because you may find, because we just had this happen. We hired a faculty member in my department who came in, had been at another school for several years. He looked at the criteria and said it's been more beneficial for him to come in as an associate without tenure because he gets to count his entire academic record. And so that looks better for him because he had a lot of publications where he was previously.
Yeah, I haven't considered what the guidelines would be if I had switched from another tenure track position, but for me, my publications as a postdoc or graduate student did not count. The papers I published since I've been at USC are the ones that count towards my tenure clock. And I think the guidelines say something like a minimum of 2 publications a year. So pretty standard.
And by that you mean on research you've done here, or can you publish something that you did as a postdoc, as long as you publish it?
That's a gray area.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend, and I haven't sat down with my chairs. Hopefully it doesn't come down to like those 1 or 2 papers that were published in whenever it was, 2012 when I started. But I figure if you were working on the paper and putting time into it while you were here, like going through drafts or editing and spending time, then I feel like that should count. If you finish that paper and submitted it, in, who knows, April before you started here in August, and it just happens to get published, the next year or something, no, I wouldn't count that, but I don't know what the rule is.
So people will look to see what there's always some period of time where, things trickle out from your postdoc after you've started your faculty position, and most people are going to opt to put their current faculty position address on those. But what people want to see is that you're independent. And so they will look at those publications, but they'll see that you're probably not last author. And they'll see you did your postdoc with so-and-so, so they're gonna know that's your postdoc stuff. So they'll look at those, but really, it's like what he said, they wanna see how many have you done since you got your space. How many last author papers do you have?
Or first author in our field.
Yeah, it depends on the field.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for staying late. But it was such a good discussion, I didn't want to stop, so thanks a lot.